Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to present the executive summary of the survey division. As you may recall, the survey division has work centered around three broad buckets. The first is looking at trait preferences across value chain roles from producers to processors to consumers. And you'll see new work on this presented by Ann Bentina on the gendered food mapping in Tanzania. The second is looking at how the patterns of trait preferences play out across individual and household level characteristics and how these relate to one another. And you'll see work from 1000 Minds and Romis, in Nigeria from Ireti, Samuel, and Bella, as well as in Uganda from Anrita and Stephen. And lastly, we look to see how currently released or plan to release varieties perform on farm with the work on Tricot we've done in Nigeria, Tanzania, and Uganda. Takeaway messages from the survey division work is what we've known. Social differences drive trait preferences. So this is a collective work around the gendered food mapping in Uganda, Tanzania, and Nigeria, as well as the 1000 Minds and Romis work. As a result, we're getting a more refined understanding of demand in Tanzania and seeing significant differences between men and women in trait preferences, as well as the locations that are located in. We're also getting a more nuanced understanding of how poverty, food security levels of a household and the location of the household, as well as the sex of the respondent answering for that household, have implications on trait preferences. And we're doing similar work around this in Uganda. For example, this heat map on the right shows the trait preferences shaded differently depending on how highly or lowly they're ranked between women and men, but we're also looking across the 4 different regions represented: poor and non-poor households, and food secure and insecure households. For example, we're seeing a greater weight and importance placed on quality traits from individuals in food insecure households compared to food secure households. And within food insecure households, we see greater importance placed by women on quality traits than men. So these are interesting results that we hope will guide breeders in their selection and importance placed on traits. Secondly, we're asking ourselves, does it matter who you ask and how in terms of methodology? So as we do these trait preference studies or adoption studies, Elizabeth Garner has been looking at past data from the cassava monitoring survey, for example, finding that there's significant differences between husbands and wives when asked about who manages cassava plots. And this is interesting because depending on who you ask from that household, you may get very different answers. This also matters for adoption when we looked at if you ask husbands or wives if they've ever planted or if they have any plots with improved cassava varieties, you get significant differences between them for cassava varieties that are currently planted. And this has a bearing on how we structure our surveys, both for trait preferences and for adoption studies. And we're doing similar work around the 1000 Minds trait rankings, the intra-household data there. We're also innovating on Tricot. We're intentionally selecting host farmers. The group in the team in Uganda has really developed a comprehensive scoping study to be able to balance representation across women and youth. And in Tanzania, when there were dropouts from cycle 1 of Tricot, they've really strove to increase the participation of women by replacing the dropouts by selecting women. And in terms of use of Tricot data, Robert and his team in Uganda have really made great effort to engage the varietal release committee and the ministry representatives to accept Tricot data in varietal release data. So that's been very exciting. And the last 2 slides just looking at data coming out of Tricot and how that could be understood and used in terms of the varietal release. What's really interesting, for example, in Nigeria is we see that the sex of the respondent is the first socioeconomic driver of genotypic selection. So for example, here we see 2 recently released clones that were released from NextGen, as well as 1 advanced clone doing very well amongst women. So this is really exciting to be able to validate that the breeding program is going in a direction that's impactful and beneficial to women farmers. We're also looking across the value chain, not just looking at the sex of the farmer, but also the sex of the processor. So who the farmer is passing on that product to process, and the relation to the household. So if the processor is the farmer or someone else. Without going into great detail here, we're seeing differences depending on who is doing the processing and what the choices are of the varieties that have been presented. So this is really exciting to be able to present back to the breeding programs. The big rocks that we see coming up in the next 2 years, really optimizing Tricot implementation so we can build that intentionality for equitable recruitment and retention, but also optimizing data collection by lead farmers and agricultural officers. Analysis is a big hurdle, really streamlining Tricot analysis across all 3 countries and building processes on how we can integrate different data streams, as I showed above with 1,000 Mines and Romas. We also want to make sure we're getting the word out. So how are we packaging this information and passing it on to breeders in a meaningful format at a meaningful time? And capacity building. We still need to deliver gender training, for example, that's been hindered by COVID. And also we're planning Tricot training in country in Tanzania and Uganda in the fall to make sure we're fulfilling this analysis streamlining that I was talking about above. With that, I'd like to thank you all for your attention and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.